I like to say that, this is what I tell my students anyway, that you can think of philosophy of science broadly as splitting into three enterprises. They overlap, but broadly speaking. One is just the sort of thing that Popper was interested in, or maybe Carnap, which is this criterion of demarcation. Why is it that some enterprises are properly called scientific, or arguments or evidence called scientific, as opposed to whatever the contrast class is? So what is, as it were, what are the hallmarks of scientific activity? And that's this kind of very broad thing that used to be quite popular. It's fallen off a bit for reasons that will immediately follow. The second thing is science can offer suggestions to long-standing philosophical questions. I mean, questions that philosophers have always been interested in, right? What are space? What's time? What's matter? Obviously, what's life? And so if you're interested in trying to understand what life is, you probably ought to learn some biology. And if you're interested in space and time, you ought to learn some physics. So there's this direction of offering resources from the sciences to the philosophers doing their everyday work. Then there's another thing, and this happens more in specialized philosophy of X, philosophy of biology, or philosophy of chemistry, or philosophy of physics, or philosophy of economics, which is that specific sciences sometimes have conceptual issues. How, after all, do explanations work here? I mean, you can raise this at a large level, like what is a causal explanation, or you can raise it in much more specific cases. What are the units of selection in evolution? What's an evolutionary explanation? What could it account for? Things like that. And so then in that case, it's not so much the philosophers going on their knees to the physicists, to the scientists, but taking the scientists as objects of certain philosophical problems. Their science is presenting some conceptual issues that philosophers are well trained. And so I find all of those quite interesting. But it helps a lot if you're interested in the more general questions to at least have one science pretty well under control, or some piece of some science under control, and understand, be able to follow the papers and be able to follow the arguments in some detail. Otherwise, it's just a bit too much airy-fairy. So I think of all of these pieces as interacting, and all of them, shedding light on each other in various circumstances.
Yeah, I've said this a number of times on the show, probably even said it when we've been talking, but philosophy, as far as I've been able to tell, and in my experience, is at its best when a philosopher is in very close contact with another discipline. And the latter two of your three reasons that you gave exemplify this totally, because on the one hand, you have science contributing to the philosophical questions, and then on the other, you have the philosopher contributing to conceptual difficulties in the science. And in the case of most of our conversations, in physics.
Right. And you see it, and it goes, often it's just, a two-way street at the time. You go to the physicist and say, look, I'm really interested in matter. What's an electron? It turns out you're not going to get a straight answer from them, right? Some of them will just beg off the question. Some of them will have very strong opinions about it, which is very hard to make sense out of, right? So it's not as if these questions are finished. And certainly when I was doing this stuff, there was a beginning of a lot of philosophy of biology, and the biologists themselves were engaged in these questions like units of selection, and what an evolutionary account could explain and make clear, and what you should expect out of it, and so on. These are things that they're struggling with too. And sometimes they like a little help, occasionally.